Welcome everybody. So this mysterious talk is about the high priority projects. So a little bit of an intro, although I guess most of you know, the High Priority Projects Initiative launched in 2005. It draws our attention to a relatively small number of projects that have been designated as high priority by the FSF, and that are strategically important. So this list helps guide volunteers, supporters, and companies to know where their skills can be utilized, whether it be in coding, graphic design, writing, financial contributions, or activism. So we have an update on this. So welcome, Sean, and please go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for that intro. I'm Sean O'Brien. I'm the chair of the High Priority Projects Committee for this go-round. We formed the committee this past fall, reformed it. This is something we do occasionally and would like to be doing more often. So one of our major goals here is to come up with a process and sort of a timeline to keep repeating this on a steady, perhaps annual timeline. And basically, I'm going to present our findings so far, and I've had wonderful help from the folks on the committee. We've primarily been communicating through the HPP-feedback mailing list. So if you're interested, that's where you would go. Some of you, many of you, have sent us feedback, suggestions, comments through a number of different mediums, but primarily I'll be focusing on what's come through the mailing list channel. And I see, for example, we have GNU2 in the chat here. That's someone I know who did participate quite a bit and give us a lot of feedback through the wiki. So we will be going through all that other information as well and trying to correlate and put it all together. So it's been very fun, but it's also, as you can imagine, kind of a detailed process. Disclaimer, we have not yet finished compiling and editing the list. Zoe Koyman, who's been helping us coordinate on the committee, and Stefano Zaccaroli have been excellent in helping us compile this information, but we still have to do more work. And so what is the HPP list? High priority projects. We're talking about specific projects, huge strategic importance to the goal of freedom for all computer users. Now, we specifically use the word project there because it's not necessarily code or a software project. It could be an accessibility initiative. It could be a localization initiative. It could be a community initiative, right? So make sure, you cut a temper when I'm using that word. And I hope I don't use dual usage in this presentation. But if I did, please, somebody call me out in the chat. We're talking about projects that impact areas where people are heavily pressured or even required to use proprietary software. We're all quite familiar with that. And of course, replacements for those situations, for those scenarios, are strategically important. And we're looking at solutions that address important missing features in existing free software, as well as problems on the horizon. And the horizon seems to be getting wider and wider as far as problems are concerned. So a great quote here from Benjamin Mako Hill. Updated high priority projects list is a description of the most important threats, the most critical opportunities that free software faces in modern computing landscape. It's never going to be fully comprehensive, of course, or adequate to address everything that faces us. But we want to focus on the things that we think are prescient, strategic, etc. And we want to make it an effective outreach tool. Right? If we're going to promote and boost and, try to send some energy, right, direct some energy into these projects, into the free software ecosystem, we need to have effective outreach. And this is one tool to do that. So common threads and feedback, and we had approximately 160 suggestions in the feedback email list, and as I said, some other suggestions through other channels as well that we're still putting together, but let's say 200-ish suggestions from folks. Common threads in that feedback are that the 2020 pandemic connected the globe, as we all know, because we are having a remote conference here. But unfortunately, they've done it with surveillance-based proprietary software instead of, for example, Big Blue Button, which is what we're using for LibrePlanet. Schools are mandating usage of proprietary software. I'm sure all of you are quite familiar with that, whether you have children in school or not, whether you're in university or not. There's extensive use of technologies like Zoom, Microsoft Teams, Google Meet, whatever the other things are. Hardware, firmware, smartphone platforms, those are critical. And I think most people would agree gaining in importance as time goes on. Citizenship software. So I thought this was very interesting. There were a lot of folks talking about things like tax software to do your taxes, banking, health stuff. That kind of software obviously is important to be able to live and be represented in the world, especially if you're lucky enough to be in a democracy. To have that sort of democratic feedback, it needs to be done through free software. And video conferencing, right? That's often the quote unquote elephant in the room. Now, I added that wasn't in anybody's feedback, but basically there were a lot of comments about video conferencing and how it's such a huge hole in, in the software approach of folks who would rather use proprietary solutions, if we can call them that. This is not just about coder hacking. As I said before, accessibility, usability, localization, privacy, and security, which are things, of course, I'm pretty immersed in. But all of those issues, all of those concerns are, of course, part of the free software ethos, right? We want to have ethical software. We want to make sure the widest possible base of folks can use it. We want to make sure we have community diversity. We want to make sure we have good representation and equity, right, in our communities. We want to push public policy that supports free software. We want to have sustainability of these projects, right, which may mean some sort of remuneration, right? We want to have government adoption and really talk about things at that level as well. Another thing that came up, which I thought was really profound and interesting, folks talking about open data and data sets, right? The tools that you use for research, well, that data needs to be available under licenses that can be, so it can be used in free software, right? And that's really an access to knowledge thing. So that's part of the wider sort of commons-based production, all those values around having good, solid data that people can get access to learn from, sources like Wikipedia and so on, and well beyond. And part of our challenge here, and I put the challenge at the bottom of the list here, is web infrastructure, right? Countering centralization and the quote unquote cloud. That's a big issue that sort of cut across a lot of the comments that we got on the committee. And certainly it's top of mind for a lot of folks, I know at the FSF and beyond. So I have a few examples here, but they're not necessarily the top examples. This one I will say is, but the other ones aren't necessarily. But this one definitely was a big deal. I can't go into all the examples. We will, of course, come out with a list and have wider discussion. I'd really appreciate some Q&A at the end where we can sort of talk about these issues specifically. And of course, if you want to send us feedback, you still can. We don't want to sort of open the floodgates to and do a big announcement saying we're going to, accept all this feedback again. But if you send us a comment, of course, it will be read, and then we'll have to discuss it and decide what we'll do with it. Okay, example, video conferencing and remote work. So the pandemic and work from home, it's given a lot of urgency, right, to replacing these traditional, and I hate to call them that, and newly dominant proprietary collaboration software. So the stuff that people were already using for proprietary collaboration, right? And now there's some new platforms, especially Zoom, which has grown quite a bit in prominence in the last year. Free software projects mentioned in feedback, Jitsi Meet, Big Blue Button, GNU Jammy, which I believe previously was Ring, and matrix.org, of course. I'm sure there are some others as well. Challenges to overcome, huge growth, these new platforms sort of being shoved down people's throats, Google, Microsoft, and the other big tech dependencies, right? And I use the word dependencies here specifically because it's not just about Google Meet or Google Hangouts or something. It's also about solutions that might have good licensing, but have some dependency in Google code, right? So you have that built-in sort of surveillance, and probably the JavaScript trap and some of the other problems we're aware of in the free software world. Okay, another example, smartphone hardware and software. Again, popular, probably not the top one. Smartphones are steadily supplanting personal computers across the globe. Despite this, free software values are underrepresented in software and hardware. We have a lot of great free software projects that are tackling this problem. And so there's a ton of them that I listed here, but certainly it's not comprehensive. Mobian, UV ports, aka Ubuntu Touch, Lineage OS, E Foundation /E/ Replicant, Pure OS from Purism, Pine 64, and all those platforms. Basically, we've got smartphones everywhere, right? But unfortunately, there's proprietary hardware, there's firmware issues, there's driver issues associated with that, the chipsets, and so on. And then we have the surveillance issues that come along with closed source, right, components, especially around modems and sensors in the phone. So. All right, another major issue, right? Home automation and IoT. This is sort of the stuff I think folks were talking about, 5-10 years ago as being something that we'd be seeing a lot of, and we are kind of starting to see a lot of it now. Internet of Things, quote unquote, is now impacting the daily lives of billions of people. That's through surveillance gadgets, the Alexas and the Ring doorbells and all that stuff at home, but also smart cities and these other initiatives that are coming through bigger channels for citizens. Projects mentioned in feedback, free software projects, Mycroft.ai, Ask Platypus, it's like .us, but Ask Platypus, and then a variety of free software for cars, industrial systems, and wearables were the primary things in this area. But a lot of stuff around personal assistance, right, which is, Mycroft and some of the other natural language processing stuff. And then also there's a worry about, vehicles and certainly the systems around us. Challenges to overcome here, proprietary dependencies, natural language via the cloud, right? A lot of this processing is done in ways that are sort of black box solutions. And again, may have strong influence from big tech players. And then there's also strong industry entrenchment, right? So as many folks know, who have done great talks at LibrePlanet on this sort of thing, cars, industrial systems, wearables, they certainly have operating systems that are entrenched, to put it mildly, and sort of disrupting that and replacing those things is going to be a challenge. Okay, social media. This is constantly in the news, certainly, and folks into free software, just learning about free software, that perspective, I think, adds a valuable layer to the discussions that are currently going on. Big tech social networks are basically the de facto web right now, which I think a lot of folks are worried about. That control, especially because there's not enough transparency into either how the networks are operated, certainly not the way the server-side softwares run or how the data is crunched and data profiles are being built. All of those issues present major challenges for free software, for software freedom more widely, and certainly surveillance and privacy concerns. Projects mentioned in feedback, a lot of stuff from the Fediverse, right? Federated social networks, decentralized solutions, Mastodon being the front runner there, Unohost, Chatones, which I was actually unfamiliar with, but very cool, and PeerTube was mentioned as well. Challenges to overcome there, centralization, surveillance, the app ecosystem, right? So a lot of these social media platforms are now so app-centric and app-based and trying to get folks to download from proprietary sources to install proprietary apps. And then also non-free JavaScript. And I have some links at the end of the talk here, but for those of you unfamiliar with the JavaScript trap or Libre.js, you should take some time, really look at that issue. We are executing code in our browsers all the time that is questionable, at least, and many times, right, not free software or of questionable origin, of unknown origin. Okay, so a lot of problems, right? But we'll get there. We'll get there together, right? And that's the important thing. We want to focus on the fight, not the struggle. And what I mean by that is we want to focus on, sort of winning the battles, approaching the challenges head on, not feeling like we're constantly, on this treadmill, right? Trying to deal with problems, right? We want to just take a strong look at what we have, try to reinforce that stuff, try to boost the projects that are in need of it, try to underscore the areas which are most strategically important, and really push software freedom forward. In that, sense, we want to make sure we counter fatigue, right? A lot of folks have what I call surveillance fatigue when I'm talking about privacy, but even just about, software choices and use of platforms and, having to be confronted all the time with issues around software freedom. It can be rough. So we want to counter that fatigue. We want to counter nihilism, right? Apathy and acceptance. Accepting the current state of affairs is not good enough. So we need to go further. There are a ton of projects out there, and as always, that's very encouraging. Tons of folks from all over the world are collaborating in new and interesting ways, coming up with new solutions, dovetailing off each other's knowledge, and contributing to each other's projects. So there's a lot of energy out there, that's for certain. It's awesome, right? But it makes the HPP list process a little difficult. So that's something to keep in mind as we come together with all this information, compile a list, and then, of course, release it. And as I said earlier, if you feel strongly about a project, you can let us know. I think it is important to, not say, hey, things are completely cut off from you. It's just we won't be announcing sort of a steady stream of submissions again. Further reading on all this, the history of the high priority projects is long and storied and wonderful. There's been a great impact that this has had in the past, and we want to continue having that kind of impact, continue pushing things forward. There have been projects, for example, where they have gone completely under a free software or copyleft license because of the high priority initiative, right? The announcements here, and for folks who may be new, right, I want to make sure we're inclusive and trying to have new folks come into the community and not just sort of speaking to the choir. I have the free software definition here, the free software directory, which is a great resource. More about respects your freedom certification, which is around hardware platforms. I know I mentioned a few of those earlier, but that's certainly an important area and a great initiative. And then, as I mentioned before, the JavaScript trap. So that's something certainly that we deal with all the time. So, and I guess I am a lot earlier than I thought for the Q&A. I can certainly talk a little more about the issues here. I had a feeling I had a lot more slides, but I'm hoping we'll get some questions as well, and then I can go back into the HPP list to talk about some of the other stuff. I put a selection of projects that were mentioned here as well. So if you're involved in these projects and you're worried that, we haven't heard from you, so to speak, we are aware of them. They run the gamut from stuff in, education, math and statistics software to, like LibreOffice, right, Office Suite, a bunch of CAD stuff and design stuff, banking software. Someone mentioned VS Code, which apparently is under new licensing, which I didn't know. Someone mentioned Signal, trying to do versions of that without dependencies that may be problematic. IPFS, which is, a peer-to-peer decentralized data store, basically, publishing platform. GNU Herd, which is a kernel project. PureOS, Purism's operating system. F-Droid. The F-Droid folks were great because they made a campaign, making sure that folks knew about the high priority projects, and we're pushing very hard for them. So they are not unknown. So F-Droid certainly is a project that a lot of folks rely upon on smartphones, which are central. So great. Do we have any questions from the audience, and how do I figure that out? Would they just be in the chat?
I'll share them with you. Just we have a couple of questions, and after that, I have a few questions of my own.
Sure.
So the
Great.
first question from the chat is F-Droid considered a high priority project?
We haven't officially come out with a list, but I can't imagine it would not be, given the amount of feedback about it. We've gotten feedback about that and a lot of things in the smartphone space, which is sort of why I talked about it in the way I did. But yeah, it seems like that's going to be on the list. Yeah, but again, we'd still need to compile it. I don't want to speak for the entire committee. They did a great job of campaigning for the project, and I'm certain there are many people in the free software world who would agree that it is important. So.
All right. So one more question is, has the new list been published yet, or are you in the process of compiling it?
Still putting it together. Yeah, we said it early in the stream, so if you're just joining us, yeah, we're still putting that information together. But we have quite a bit of a few submissions. I can talk a little bit more about what's come in, but we do not have the list yet. So.
All right. So one question is, do you have examples of the FSF funding going towards some of the needs you mentioned today? For example, they remember an old high priority project list a long time ago that was getting rid of the prevalence of Adobe Flash, and the FSF funded work developing an alternative .swf runner.
Yeah, so I'm not aware of recent funding of any high priority projects, but I don't know enough about that aspect of it. So I've just sort of been appointed to be chair of this committee. As if somebody else on the FSF wants to talk about that, I have seen in the past, I can recall that that has been done. And I'm certain if we could find other folks in the software freedom world as well, it would be great to direct energy and funds to the big projects, or the projects that we identify as strategically important, I should say. The Flash one's a great example. We don't have to deal with that anymore, which is nice. But maybe now that energy can go into something fresher and more, a little more relevant to our world. So.
All right. We have a question from GNU2 about the process. Once the list is done, it's too late. Before that, is there a way of address? 1 second. Yeah, it must be. Yeah, before it's done, you might send duplicate comments. Is there a way to address that? That is, more than one person might have the same concerns or comments.
Yeah, so the way we've been weighting it, and I guess I should have gone a little more into this, into the process so far, but the way we've been weighting it is sort of trying to group based upon category and then saying, okay, there's been X number of comments around this one issue. And I try to come across with that a little bit with the slides. But for example, we have, top category software, then collaboration software, right? And then under that, video conferencing. And we'll say we have X number of comments that are approaching that specific issue. And then we can drill down and then look at projects below that. Like which ones were most mentioned, which ones seem most crucial or are addressing a problem that needs to be addressed. So yeah, we are sort of compiling. It's not completely like, hey, if you hammer us with 1,000, wonderful requests for a project, we will do that. For example, obviously we brought up F-Droid. F-Droid has a very strong presence, impact, huge amounts of daily users, daily free software users, right? So if it were a Sean Droid that I came up with tomorrow and I just hammered the list, it would not do as well. So.
All right. So one more question is, what are the most difficult questions or challenges that you encounter while discussing the list in the committee? Like, what are the hardest questions to answer to justify something?
Yeah, so I think it can be difficult to try to extricate your own experience, like separate your own experience in free software from, wider community concerns. I think we did a great job of getting a diverse a lot of diverse feedback from all over the place. But trying to make sure, for example, we're not weighing one area a little bit too much, right? Like, I don't know, enterprise stuff or some specific area that may have a wider sort of visibility. But, you know, I mean, there's other stuff that's not as visible, and maybe that's a good reason to highlight it in the HPP list. And sort of figuring out where that metric is, I think is difficult. And I think it's something we'll still be discussing quite a bit. I also think personally, and this is just me personally, but I also know there's some others on the committee who feel the same way, that we shouldn't just focus on software as software, code, hacking, etc. It would be really nice to make sure we're pushing some real solid community-driven efforts to, you know, bring more people into the fold, so to speak, to really do things like good accessibility, good UI, UX, you know, research, and things like that, which are sort of perpetual comments about free software in general. And, you know, I think if the FSF says, hey, this is really important, this is an actual priority, you know, that can help address that pretty strongly. So.
Right. So I have a question from my side, actually. So this is a little bit off topic. So one of the goals of the high priority list is to encourage free software adoption by governments. So, you know, in governments, it can be really hard to enforce accountability. I'm speaking from my experience. In India, in a state called Kerala, there was this body formed called ICFOS, International Center for Free and Open Source Software, by the government. So initially, you know, everything seemed great. They spoke to all of the free software communities in India. Their director spoke to them, and later it all died down. It devolved to, you know, solely academic type stuff without any focus on software. And it can be very difficult to enforce any sort of accountability from governments, because, you know, somewhere along the line the money either gets eaten up or I don't know what happens. So what suggestions do you have for enforcing accountability within free software communities?
Yeah, so Kerala is certainly an example. There are other examples I'm quite familiar with. I think historically, there has been a big push, especially around the beginning of the 21st century into the first decade or so. There was a big push for, you know, international adoption of free software, many times under another name like FOSS or so on. And you know, we had UN papers about it. We had countries like South Africa and so on, you know, on paper mandating it. And then we did not see those mandates doing very much, right? We saw situations in Europe where you'd have a government switch to a free software platform or infrastructure maybe, and then switch back, you know, and so on and so forth. I think recently I've actually been rather encouraged personally, and it could be, again, myopic and maybe I'm not looking widely enough, but it seems to me that there's been a shift in the other direction. We do have, you know, one of the positives of the pandemic, I guess you could say, which is a terrible thing to say, but one of the things that is good about people communicating through networks so much is that people are forced to get out of their comfort zone and try new solutions. And
Yes.
where free software solutions are the best at something or better, or, you know, we can explain the ethical, privacy, and security, you know, benefits of them. I think that folks are perfectly fine with that and actually embrace it when I speak to them,
Yes,
right?
yes. Actually, a lot of people brought this up because, you know, in the video streaming stuff space, I think that the free software alternatives are actually a whole lot better. Like, I had to use Microsoft Teams, and I think it's the worst piece of software I've ever used. So, you know, for some reason, because of the whole inertia that's there, people are very willing to go along with working with a non-functional, dysfunctional piece of software just because everyone else is using that. So just breaking that chain is really hard. It's not just about functionality.
Well, so the old phrase used to be, right, nobody ever got fired for buying IBM, right? certainly these governments and these enterprises, that's the mindset, but there's also a personal dimension to that too. Folks
Yes.
want to feel comfortable about buying a Mac and just using whatever Tim Cook tells them they have to use, right?
Yeah.
So it's a problem, and we really do need to face it. I will say though, as well, there's been a lot of scrambling to put more features, for example, into something like Jitsi Meet or Big Blue Button and so on, and a lot of really good development in a short period of time. But we still do have a ways to go with some of these things. With power and influence and the weight of cash, some of these proprietary alternatives are getting pretty good pretty quickly, and it's going to be hard to meet them head-on parity feature for feature.
All right.
So.
So yeah, coming back to the questions from the list, a person asked, a lot of people I know are prevented from using GNU/Linux by small bugs or missing features. Like there might not be support for MS Office documents, or missing a proper PDF editor. So this person is arguing that wouldn't it be more profitable to focus on small things instead of bigger things? That's their argument. So it's not really a question, but yeah, it's an opinion.
Yeah, I mean, it can be difficult to know what to do strategically, right? Using the example of Flash, certainly. One of the reasons Flash fell out of fashion is completely outside of the free software world. Flash fell out of fashion because a lot of the features that Flash was giving folks were integrated into standards that ended up in the browser, right? In so-called HTML5, in JavaScript, in WebRTC, the technology we're using right now. These sorts of things replaced Adobe Flash / Shockwave. So, what if we had poured a lot of more energy into that and continued to pour energy into that? Well, maybe it would be wise, maybe it wouldn't. Maybe it would go away faster, would have gone away faster, right? So I don't think there's easy answers there. I would say, as far as formats are concerned for Microsoft and operating systems and so on, in my experience, things have gotten a lot better than they used to be. So I'm hoping the list can do at least that. And maybe some of it is focusing on small things, little things. But yeah, it can be difficult to say. So.
All right. So another question from GNU2. So software components used in free software infrastructure sometimes change licenses to non-free licenses. So an example of this is Elasticsearch. So would pushing people to take up the maintenance of the last free version to fit inside this, would something like this fit inside the HPP list, or is this a side issue?
That's a good question that I don't think we have resolved or considered. I can tell you what I think personally. I think it's really important to make sure that we continue pushing copyleft licenses far into the future. I think one of the main issues we're seeing is not only companies, defecting, so to speak, from a license that's considered free software, or the other term open source, but also that copyleft isn't being embraced, and especially licenses like GPL v3, AGPL v3. They're not being embraced at the rate that they need to be, in my opinion, to be sustainable. So I think certainly it's something to consider. And we did actually have a mention, now that I recall, of Elasticsearch in the feedback, which may have hedged on this very issue. So I will go back and look at that and make sure I communicate it to everybody on the mailing list. So.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, actually this is very relevant. Sometimes, you have softwares that are technically under a copyleft license, but then they support things like proprietary extensions, or you have the case of the Android open source project, which is like almost unusable without Google services. So, there's a difference between something being free software in spirit and free software on the letter. So, yeah.
Yeah, sure, that's right. And it's worth mentioning as well that companies like Google are trying to replace as much of the stack as they can with software that's not licensed under the GPL, for example. Project Fuchsia is a big example of that. And maybe that won't go anywhere, right? Maybe it will die in some way or another, but there certainly is an incentive and seems to be an impetus on the part of many of these big tech companies to not only drive the so-called copy center licenses, MIT expat, et cetera, but also to start pushing away from those licenses completely.
Yeah, so somebody here has asked, what specific tasks do we have towards freeing software related to interfacing with submitting tax forms and banks? I guess this is relevant to security and privacy concerns given the amount of personal information you have to upload.
Yeah, so that's certainly an issue with a lot of the solutions we're talking about, right? To bring them up to parity with systems that are completely under surveillance and totally not private, which is what we have now, we have to come up with solutions that are secure, are private, and do it in a way that's not centralized around some cloud infrastructure, so-called cloud. That's not easy. And it's certainly a huge challenge. The comments about taxes and banking software and et cetera so far, I think, though, are more about access and usage at all, right? We unfortunately are in a state of affairs right now where we can't even yet worry about the privacy and security concerns of a free software, banking app or something. Because when you have to communicate with your bank, you've got to install some proprietary app from Apple or Google, right? I think the concerns are around that. I know there is some free software, I should say, that can do U.S. tax forms, but it does it in a more limited way. And it seems to me that the long-term trajectory of where, and first off, that's U.S. centric, right? And secondly, the long-term trajectory of where this is going, unfortunately, is towards proprietary platforms. So what I was surprised by as well, which I don't think has been mentioned directly, is voting. That's a whole other issue, right? Participating as a citizen in a democracy means that you have to use proprietary software. And I'm certain that there are folks at the FSF who think deeply about this. But of course, the flip side of that is we have to make sure that votes are counted, verified, private, secure. And that's not easy. So,
yeah. So, another question, and we're into the last 5 minutes, so we don't have a lot more questions to take. What discussion has the committee had on how to help the HPP actually have the impact we need? For example, visioning the process from HPP to actual results. Yeah, that's the question.
Yeah, so I mean, there's been a ton of support from the FSF for me and the other folks so far. I'm not sure we have a battle plan, so to speak, yet. So let's get the list, and then we can figure out, the marketing and going to battle part of it. And maybe that does involve getting some funds, trying to get grants or who knows what. I don't know exactly what the plans are there. But certainly, I hope when we speak this time next year, we can talk about all the great things that we've done between now and then. So,
yeah. So, yeah, I guess that's it for the questions. And there's no more questions. Any closing comments?
Yeah, I just want to thank everybody. I very much appreciate the open arms that the free software community has given me, and I hope other folks who are involved with LibrePlanet today also feel that way. LibrePlanet, especially the in-person version, which I very much enjoyed, has always been wonderful, and I think has done a great job in expanding the voice of the movement, so to speak, much more widely than it was. So I hope everybody out there is supporting the FSF, pushing, talking about LibrePlanet, trying to promote it through whatever channels they have. And let's get some more folks on board. I don't mean to sound, this is the challenge of, right, focusing on the fight and not the struggle, right? We want to focus on, okay, there's a lot of stuff out there that we can beat. And we're working towards that. But at the same time, of course, you have to recognize all these problems. And HPP will be another way that we can communicate those issues, communicate what we think is strategically important, and keep on moving. So,
right. So there's a lot of claps in the chat. So yeah,
Yeah. And the other thing to think about, of course, we want to do this more often, right? So if your
Yeah,
favorite project or the project you're working on doesn't end up in the list this time around, maybe it will in the next one. And there are many other ways that we can be pushing and talking about and supporting projects beyond HPP as well. So, okay, thank you all so much. I appreciate it.
yeah, thank you. So I guess we can bring things to a close. I mean, it's just about closing time, and thank you for being here. And I really enjoyed the talk. And
Yeah.
yeah,
I want to make sure my cat, who's been pissed off the entire time, can say hello.
yes,
Thanks so much, everybody. I'll see you on the flip side. Please reach out directly through the HPP feedback list or however, and we'll get back to you. Okay? Thanks.
all right, all right. Thank you, thank you.